The thing about stagflation that's different than inflation and deflation is that inflation and deflation are consequences of price action in the market, right? Just a real quick TLDR. For those who are wondering what the difference is, because I know a lot of you guys keep hearing stagflation is the new thing with transitory. So inflation is when, costs rise, right? So inflation will be costs of goods, services, and whatnot going up across the board, right? And why is that bad? Because people can't afford things. Now, inflation is bad to a certain extent. In some cases, inflation is not bad. In some points, inflation is good. If you have high employment and growing GDP, then inflation is a good thing. It's a sign of a healthy economy, right? If prices go up on things and people can afford them, then businesses can then, have extra capital or raise prices. And then if they have demand because people are still making money, they can hire new people, which then increases more employment, which then, helps GDP continue to grow, and hopefully personal income rises. Obviously not for minimum wage jobs because those people get taken advantage of. But regardless, inflation can be a good thing. You want to have inflation. You want it if it's in tandem with a growing economy. If you have a growing economy and prices don't increase, then you can flip it to deflation. Deflation then becomes a problem, because then you might be saying to yourself, well, Stocky, why would that be bad? I'd love for deflation. I'd love for the price of things to continue to go down every year. No, you don't. You may be able to afford things for a little while. And you'd be like, wow, man, I can buy this cheaper now. I can buy more of these. But the problem is that if prices start dropping on things because demand, the demand isn't quite there, then what ends up happening? You end up seeing businesses cut jobs. And now you have more and more unemployment. And then that causes prices to continue to drop, which in turn keeps that cycle going, which then grinds GDP to a halt and puts us into a recession, which in turn puts more and more people out of work. And then the Fed has to come in and start the engine again. So it's good to have inflation if employment and GDP is up, but you don't want runaway inflation, or you don't want hyperinflation, because then things start outpacing. That's when the Fed has to come in and pull the brakes, because to be honest, and I know that this started with one analyst talking, but he wasn't wrong, a recession is actually better than hyper/runaway/10% plus inflation. Why? Because of the recession, you see a pullback in GDP, which will eventually trickling down lower prices and everything, but the government can come in, step in, and in the short term, provide people capital to continue to purchase things. With runaway extreme inflation, nobody can afford anything. And there's no way that personal income levels and the money flowing into people's pockets is going to keep up with it. So now people can't afford to eat or get medical supplies or fix their houses or pay their mortgage. That's when you get civil wars and shit, like civil unrest, I should say. So it's a very fine line. Now, you might be saying, okay, Stocky, but does that mean stagflation? We just bounce between the two? No. Stagflation is basically a big problem. This happened in the 1970s. If you go back to look at the 1970s chart, you'll see unemployment and inflation were both up. That is a problem. So today's job report was a little bit of a nice surprise, with the non-farm payroll coming in much higher than expectations, but also revising December and November up significantly. I think they revised up November by 300,000 plus and November by 400,000 plus. And this was a 400,000 increase this month. But you also saw that the unemployment rate ticked up from 3.9% to 4%. And you're saying to yourself, Stocky, that's good. That the jobs are coming in. Why would the unemployment numbers actually go up? Well, because remember, unemployment only accounts for people that are out of work but are actively looking for work. So what does that mean? That means people are trying to return to the job market again. Why are people trying to return to the job market? Well, either A, they're out of cash. B, unemployment benefits are drying up. We've already seen personal savings dip out of the sky. Some states are already cutting off rental and housing assistance, but more importantly, personal income is going up and payrolls are going up because businesses are paying more money to incentivize workers. So that's bringing people back out of the woodwork. So if you were to account for the amount of people that are out of work that aren't actively looking for work, unemployment may be as high as 8 to 10%, but it isn't counted. How do I get this number? Well, think about it. Minus the early retirees, we saw 4 million plus people walk away from the workforce every single month from April until December. There's also a lot of people that took time off to take care of their kids when they were out of school, or to take care of family members, or people that were sick or whatever. There's a lot of people out of the workforce. What does this mean? And I showed you guys where the reports were of the jobs added. Jobs added were in what we expected them to be: leisure, hospitality, people getting out of the pandemic, right? Those aren't high-paying jobs. Servers, hotel front desk people, those aren't high-paying jobs. So the amount of people that we saw in that jobs report coming back into the workforce were not high-income jobs. Some of them will barely pay more than what these people were making on unemployment. So we're not seeing this massive inflow of potential spending going on. When GDP is falling, in other words, growth of the economy slows down. Doesn't have to reverse, it doesn't have to go negative, it doesn't have to be flat, it just slows down at the pace. When unemployment goes up, demand falls, and inflation is still increasing. This is a big problem. The biggest question I get when I talk about this is, Stocky, I don't understand. How can demand fall and inflation go up? That's where you ask the Fed. That's where your rates, that's where your cheap money. That's where supply chains can happen. There may not be as much demand for something, but the price is still going up. Do you think there's more demand for meat now than there was 6 months ago? Do you think there's more demand for diapers now than there was a year ago? No. Demand is either flat or down. This doesn't mean reversal. You just have a negative or lower than expectations. There are some things that are higher in demand, but overall demand is down from its month-to-month increase. This doesn't mean a reversal, but the month-to-month increase. Yet inflation is still running. Rates are still at zero, even though we know they're gonna cool off. We still have supply chain issues. We have demand in certain areas that is significantly higher, driving the price of those products up, which then in turn drives all the other prices up. Unemployment is up, regardless of what those reports say. Unemployment compared from now versus before COVID, regardless as if you're counting people actively looking for work or not, is significantly higher. There are significantly more people out of the workforce now than there were 2 years ago. So GDP is going to slow down. It can't grow at the level it was because we lost so much that when people started returning, it started bouncing back. But it's going to have to slow down. Unemployment is increasing or has increased. Demand is dipping in some areas. In some areas, it's going to increase. Travel, hospitality, leisure, restaurants, those are going to go up. And then inflation increasing. Our inflation is not slowing down. And we keep pushing off the rates. And how many rates are going to happen? And at some point, they're going to have to do a drastic pullback. They are going to have to hit hard brakes. Originally, we were going to pump the brakes before we hit the wall. Now, they're just going to have to pull the handbrake. And not to sound like a fudder, because I'm not, but I'm trying to give you an analogy that you can actually visualize. I want you to think about people in a car. Mom, dad, mom, dad, son, daughter, non-binary, whatever you want to be, and the little dog are driving. You are running with inertia. You are going 60 miles an hour. You're flying. That's inflation right now. This is your dollar, your bank account, your stocks, your everything, your housing price and everything. Pumping the brakes before you get to that big semi-tractor trailer, which is the come to reckoning moment. Pumping the brakes allows everyone to slowly, it may be uncomfortable, but it's going to allow you to slowly get down to a level where you can stop safely. The problem is that instead of pumping the brakes, you keep saying, we'll be fine. I'll just hit the brakes before we get there. And then you realize you're really close and you slam on the brakes. Remember, just because, this car is traveling at 60 miles an hour and so are the people. The car stops abruptly, but the people don't. That's the concern here of waiting too long to pull on the brakes. So everyone dies? No, the father's the only one who lives because he was actually driving drunk. And unfortunately, drunk drivers often survive because they're so lucid that they don't tense up before an accident and they snap less bones, and oftentimes they'll be the ones that survive. No, but that's the analogy that we're looking at right now with the Fed waiting to raise rates. And if they are going to raise rates, they're looking at small little bumps. It's not going to help. We're getting to a point where we're just waiting too long to hit the brakes. Now, that doesn't mean we're gonna completely crash. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that this is the concern right now. Why? And the reason I haven't driven or shown this picture of crash and bodies mangled and all that is because we're not there yet. But this is just what we're trying to avoid.